thank you very much to Alessia, and thank you to all of you for being here, and mostly, of course, thanks to Oksana. We've just been talking about how events like this are fun for you if they're fun for us, and vice versa. We've already been having quite a lot of fun in the green room, and it was only the one glass of wine. So. Oksana went on a book tour to Poland a year ago, almost to the day, and she still hasn't gone home permanently. We all know exactly why that was, and her experiences of the last 12 months since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine informs her latest work, which is My Longest Book Tour. Oksana, I just wonder if you could take us back and tell us how life has unfolded for you since the 24th of February last year.
It's a little bit like retelling, the beginning of your own book. But that's how I started it. I'm sorry, it is a kind of impolite, on author's part to tell about the book which is not yet available in the language which you can read. That is, it is not yet translated into English. I can only offer, except for obvious Ukrainian, I can offer German, Italian, Polish, Norwegian, Swedish, and Dutch translations. So some choice there is after all. In fact, it is the first book that I wrote at the publisher's request, and it was a Western publisher who wanted me to explain to their audience everything they have missed about the historical and cultural contexts of this war since 2014. So I tried to do my best. The idea was merely commercial. The initial idea was merely commercial, like, some brochure or pamphlet or book-long essay, like Timothy Snyder, who explains the East to our readership. And I was like, no, sorry, I am no Timothy Snyder. I can only do something, based first and foremost on my personal experience. And even though this book is about, cultural and historical contexts, all my philosophical background all of a sudden, turned to be, quite useful to my surprise. But it starts with this, very lyrical, I would say, an introduction of a narrator, because every story depends on the narrator. It depends on who is telling a story. And to introduce the narrator as a woman being stuck, like between sky and earth, in the air, all of a sudden, just going abroad to the neighboring Poland, which is like, next door, just for 3 days. Because my Polish book appeared in Polish bookstores on February 23, 2022. Yeah, so that's like fate's joke, so to speak. And yes, I still keep this ticket. I still keep the return ticket, which I never used since then. I mean, I've been home, but in summer, but it was with the car, and we don't have flights over Ukraine since February 24. February 23 there to present my book with a very tight schedule, 19 interviews on schedule and two readings. What do you get? You get, you know, 2 outfits for 2 readings. Yes, you get some cosmetics and some underwear, and of course, I mean, it's a carry-on. It was a carry-on luggage. So I've decided, at the very last moment, I was hesitant whether I should take my laptop with me, and I've decided to leave it back home. Yeah, because, I mean, with 19 interviews and 2 meetings for 3 days, well, of course, I won't be having time even to open it, you know, it's such an intense program. So I arrived, you know, I've done 2 interviews and had 1 business dinner with my Polish agent. I went to bed very lately, you know, with posting on my Facebook page my impression of how Borispil Airport looked, how strangely Borispil Airport looked on that day, on February 23 afternoon. It was full of fleeing Russians. Who were these people? You know, who were these people? Why were they so scary? And these voices of behind my back when we were standing in the security line, and the little boy saying, "Mommy, mommy," in Russian. "And when the war is over, we will be back." And this horrified voice of a woman, "What war? What you are talking about?" With this anger and fear hidden in the voice at the same time, like, "I'll show you, I'll show you." The baby obviously, the kid obviously, you know, said something which was not meant, you know, for the public, and was not warned that this should not be pronounced in public. So obviously these people knew something we in Ukraine did not. And I posted this very brief, you know, info, just my impression at 1:30 a.m. and went to bed. And then I was awakened with a phone call, like, goodness, just before 6, idiot, why is he waking me up? I'm having such an intense trip, why is he waking me up so early? Yeah. So my first reaction was, oh, idiot, why he's calling so early? Well, and then it was this phrase, which at that hour, you know, millions of Ukrainians were exchanging with their loved ones. Honey, it started. They are bombing us. And it started, you know, like when we memorize this, you know, every time it is the same memory. Someone called and said, it started. It started, honey, it started. And yes, it started. That's how it started, and the next weeks were, you know, like all, I don't know, one day, so to speak. So in a way, it is still, I would say, I write about this perception of time in this book. It is not only mine again, like we have February 363 nowadays. It is still, you know, the same never-ending February. It is still the same big interruption in time, big interruption, this being suspended, you know, between between air and S, living on flights, living on, well, from one, well, just to give you an idea, a very brief idea, what it is like, somewhere in the end of the past year, in December, I've turned the location in my telephone, and Google reacted, you know, with this happy innocence of the artificial intellect. Congratulations, Oksana. You have visited 21 countries and 93 cities this year. Yeah, and I've started to scream back in English. Who the hell told you I wanted to? This was not my choice. I had totally different plans for this year, you know. So I would say it's, of course, it is a kind of a perverted life, but all this, you know, how should I explain it? For me, it was passing unnoticed, kind of, you know, the most smoothly as possible. I came to work. I came for a book tour, a brief one, you know, a 3 days long one. So it's been a work, and this work is going on, you know, with an avalanche of journalists questioning me, you know, about the war and about the context of this war, and with the new book that I wrote to explain this war, and now having to answer, you know, the new turn of the questions, and so on and so forth. So I have kind of become a war speaker, so to speak. I mean, and this is not, again, this was not my choice. That's not something, you know, I wanted to do as a writer. As a writer, a year ago, well, in January last year, I was still working on my new novel, and damned, I did like it. I mean, it was a good stuff, you know. No, I've recently reread it after 1 year interruption, and it is, you know, like reading somebody else's text, and I liked it, but it was written by a totally different person, you know. I can't just go back to it like entering the door that was just, you know, closed behind me, and then, you know, returning and reopening it and going in like nothing happened. No way. But still, you know, it is a kind of it is like continuation, or rather an unexpected pathological turn which my international literary career has taken, and I do feel like I would say, mobilized in a way back then, with the fact that I was caught with the invasion abroad. And yes, I was prepared with all my previous career and all my life. I was prepared to speak for my country. Okay, so that's what I should do, and that's what I'm going to do until we win the war.
And you have been speaking about it, I mean, for a long time in your writing. So, for instance, your book, The Museum of Abandoned Secrets, that takes us through a whole sweep of history. I mean, as Alessia was saying, the Cassandra of Ukraine, you have warned about this for a very long time. And in fact, in your latest piece, your New York Times op-ed piece, I mean, it seemed to me, I mean, you were talking about Russia's new totalitarianism, if it had been recognized back then in the early 90s, but also I felt implying that maybe we are to blame. The West is complicit in what happened because of our inaction. And that's something you've explored not only in that article, but also in your previous work.
Thank you very much, Georgina. It is, you know, so heartbreaking. Just to realize that every time, you know, decent people feel guilty, and those who are guilty don't feel this way. And I mean, I would say, you know, I share this same sense of. It is not that I am, you know, judging. I'm sorry if it sounded, you know, like this, you know, column in New York Times, you know, that everyone now writes me about, that it sounds like, you know, the text of a pent-up bile, so to speak. I don't think, you know, I'm in a position, like I feel my responsibility as well, because that's what every intellectual starts or should start asking herself, like, what did I miss, what have I done wrong, or what have not I done which could have been done to prevent this, you know? And no matter how many books or essays or novels you might have written, you still have this feeling that you have missed something just because you were not at war for all these 30 years. You were a normal woman living your regular life, yes. You know, writing was a part of the profession, was your professional life, but still, I mean, you were busy with many other things. While war is actually, it is just you and the issue of survival, you know, and especially when it comes to the annihilation war like the one that Russia is conducting now against Ukraine. So it is always this feeling. You know, we are coming to a very interesting issue now. I say that the whole Ukraine is now the community of guilty people. Those who are abroad feel guilty with regard to those who are who stay in the country, who did not leave the country. Those who stay in the country feel guilty with regard to those who are fighting on the front. Those who are on the front are feeling guilty with regard to those who are in the hospital, and those who are in the hospital feel guilty with regard to those who were killed. So it is, you know, this chain of guilt and this chain of, I would say, this feeling of, I don't know, maybe that's the other side of empathy. Which might be a weapon as well, and maybe not the worst weapon of all, if you think about it. If you think that every totalitarianism is a society of lonely, dispersed individuals, as Hannah Arendt described it. And if you think about contemporary Russia, where this alienation went as deep as the family level, where there is no horizontal connections, no, like all the energy is delegated upstairs, and all the responsibility is on the personal level is refused. That's more or less, you know, this, I would say, well, ideal soldier that all the dictatorships dream about. So maybe this sense of empathy, of solidarity, of this, you know, guilt and this complacency. I mean, you've raised the subject, you know. So maybe that's exactly what we can, you know, this Maidan of sensitivity, some global Maidan of mutual sensitivity is the strongest thing that can stand against the threats of the new dictatorships, of these new dictatorships. Maybe that's exactly why they won't win. That's it.
Just back to your writing, and particularly to your book, the Museum of Abandoned Secrets. I know that everybody mentions sex work, field sex work guide in Ukraine, but actually I haven't. Yeah, everybody mentions sex, but actually you think of the museum book as your seminal work.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it takes on this 300 years, really, of history. I mean, World War II, what happened after that, but also the 70s, and that's something that you remember, and your parents were so deeply involved in that.
Mm-hmm. There's something I have yet to write about, and shit, now Putin is stealing the time of my life, which is designed for writing. And here I repeat one of the Ukrainian soldiers who was screaming at this Russian soldiers when they were captured, like, what the hell, with all this cursing, with all these F words, which I'm not supposed to reproduce, here in the London Library.
I'm sure it's been said before.
Surrounded with all these books, just of the respect to all these books, and all the minds that produced them. But that was like, why on earth? Why you are here? Why do I have to meddle with you? I am a teacher. I want to teach children. And that was it. That's like an interruption in the whole nation's creativity. We all were doing something. We were building something. We were creating something. We were teaching children. We were writing books. We were building houses. We were so on and so forth. So it's this precisely. That's this level of violence at which you feel that, that's, the violation of your right to create, of your right to be productive, And speaking of the 70s, and speaking, of this experience, it's actually, just to summarize very briefly, how I see now, looking back, the Museum of Abandoned Secrets. Well, for those of you who haven't read it, it's quite a voluminous work. I am sorry, it's some 800 pages long, and yes, it covers, the whole post-war period. It starts with the World War II, but basically it's like about 80 years of Ukrainian history. The action takes place in two times. There are characters from the 1940s, and there are characters from the first years of the century, before the Orange Revolution, which was in 2004. So it's like kind of the upsurge of the Orange Revolution, but not yet Orange Revolution, just before, the months before. In fact, in a way, it can be read now when looking back as a book about the information war. Because yes, the main character is a journalist, and it is, I would say, the story, hers, is a story of the subjugation in media, of the degradation of media, and actually how they turn in an instrument of the mass manipulation. And yes, there are, these different members of the same family, scattered in time, who don't know about each other, and it is only in the end you have to go through all these 800 pages. To see in the end that it might be read as a police novel or whatever, and to see how all this convoluted stories actually make a whole puzzle, but again, it is only from the outside. None of the characters has the full story. None of the characters sees the full story. But in a way, now in a way it is about this missed lessons of the 20th century history, for which we all pay now. Because yes, in the 90s, I mean, it was only, the mistake of this, Western way of thinking. Maybe, okay, Western decision makers, they were having more responsibility. And this, this belief in this Belle Epoque, this belief, this Western, I would say, pride that made Western political class believing that it was West that has won the Cold War. And now there is nothing to be afraid of, nothing to fear on the side of this, mysterious and permanently threatening East. Okay, Russia is now just an ordinary, poor country which needs our support to be democratic, to be transformed into a young democracy, and we are going to help, Russia on its way to transformation and so on. So in fact, the Cold War was not, it was not won. It was not stopped. It was stopped one-sidedly on the side of the West, while it was going on the side of Kremlin with the same technologies that were applied by the Soviet Union, and Putin is now repeating, along to the same textbooks, from the KGB school from the 70s, he is using exactly the same techniques and the same strategies. And if you really know history, and if you have, these memories of the 70s,
your parents were not allowed to talk.
Insiders, memories of the 70s. Goodness, I remember all that. I know this language, I know this, I know these technologies, I know this, how the first, now they enter, they occupy any settlement, and they start with the first wave of repressions against, the Ukrainian militaries, the priests of the Ukrainian churches. There are two: Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and the the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And teachers of the Ukrainian, teachers of Ukrainian literature, they take the books, the books on Ukrainian history and the Ukrainian books from the libraries, this, repressions, this book repressions, it's I would say a particularly interesting, chapter of this cultural war, but it's been this way just on less noticeable scale in the times when Andropov was the head of the Soviet KGB and Lieutenant Putin then, was just a student of some KGB school, and that's it, that's how their mentality was shaped, and there is absolutely direct continuity which was never interrupted. So this, wishful thinking that we all were sharing back in the 90s, this Fukuyama's feast You know, the end of history. The end of history, you know, nothing horrible will happen anymore. We are not going to have wars anymore. We are going to have mutually beneficial cooperation, you know, sales and cultural exchange and whatever else. Okay, you know, yeah, you can go on. You know, I don't need to waste my breath describing this way of thinking. And yes, you know, the voices, I would say, of even of those countries who joined the European Union, with whom you used to be for a while in the same European Union, like Poland and the Baltic states. You know, they were not taken, I would say, seriously when they were warning, you know, the West against some, you know, aggressive intentions of the Russian government and against the restoration of authoritarianism and some police measures, you know, that Russian government is taking against their own population. No, it was seen as, you know, some kind of, you know, prejudice on the side of these young democracies, you know, who are so, well, archaic in their thinking, that they just don't see that we are in the 21st century. I mean, this is my favorite phrase. I'm sorry. I mean, I've been screaming so many times when I was hearing, you know, during the interviews, like, but how is it possible in the 21st century? My goodness, what is so special in the 21st century that makes, you know, such a big difference with the 20th century, with the time of our grandmothers? What is the difference? That we have an internet. Go and read Astrid Lindgren's war diaries from 1940. You know, when she is watching the Soviet aggression against Finland from the distance, and with the same kind of amazement. But how come in the 20th century? 1940, Stockholm, 1940. Astrid Lindgren, you know, a young mother, incapable to grasp how possible something like this in the 20th century. So in a way, you know, we all need, I mean, rereading good writers, even their diaries, you know, to stay in touch with reality. And yes, it is about, like you know, what I've done in this novel, in the Museum of Abandoned Secrets. In a way now, you know, that I look back because it was published 12 years ago. And tomorrow I'm flying to Vilnius to present the Lithuanian translation of this novel at Vilnius Book Fair. It's going to be 8th or 9th translation of this book. I would say now it's about the inevitability of this war. It's about the way how it's been. It's about, maybe, now I know, I might now give a formula, that we all have been living, you know, for all this time, for the lifetime. We've been living within something which later on, a couple of generations after maybe, will be described as a centennial war. It's the same plot, you know, from 1914, you know, interruption, you know, taking a breath, taking a break and getting a strength for a new round, okay? Second World War, which was the immediate continuation of the First World War. Well, and since, you know, the destructions were so horrific, so horrendous, so gargantuan after World War II, then humankind needed a longer period to take a breath and to somehow, you know, the evil also needed, you know, a break to get more strength. And it is, yes, it is a part of our responsibility that we were careless, I don't know, cowardly. There was a certain part of, you know, intellectual cowardice in all this, you know, dominant mainstream, and that's something which I, you know, share as an intellectual too. You know, the lack of intellectual cowardice to call spade a spade, just to stand up and say, hey, well, but this is the birth, this is the rise of a new Hitler. And no, you don't say that. You don't say that, no, I mean, don't trigger, these are, you know, things which are not pronounced because it is too traumatic, and let's, you know, not do this, and we've invented a special term for this, which is political correctness, which is more than one is used or rather misused just to mask this lack of intellectual cowardice, of intellectual courage, you know. Yeah, cowardice and ignorance. Cowardice and ignorance. That's it. This, that's very human. Like both are human, you know. But still, you know, we are within the same drama. It is now the third act of the same drama, and if we see it this way, I mean, at least that's how I now see the story, this very convoluted story in the Museum of Abandoned Secrets and what my characters were fighting in it with. Well, yes, it might be helpful now not to go on and join the efforts to make this third act the final one. I hope so.
In a moment, I'm going to open the floor to questions, but before I do, I'd just like to talk a little bit more generally about Ukrainian literature and how this war has really brought Ukrainian literature out of the shadows, but also how we can expect to see a change. Will there be like a kind of striation in rock pre and post war writing, and how you have used that as evidenced in this fantastic book, which is translated into English. Will you be using that personal slant on the political?
Thank you very much. We have how much time?
Not very long, but you know, I've realised that doesn't matter to you because this is the second interview we've done and you do just talk in paragraphs, and your last interview was meant to last 15 minutes and I think it was 45, so you just do what you like.
I've never been good at short sentences. Well, you know, it's actually an absolutely exciting subject. I mean, when you think about it, when you think how, one of my favorites, you know, how literature is how some literature is getting known, makes it, you know, to the world's attention due to something, well, really momentous happening in your country, which awakens the sense of guilt and empathy in the rest of mankind. There was the Czech literature before us, which was not fully discovered by the West until 1968 and the Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia. There was Polish literature that became fashionable in 1980 with the introduction of the martial law in then communist Poland and with the heroic resistance of Polish Solidarność. Okay, that's when Czesław Miłosz got Nobel Prize and everyone discovered that these Poles have literature, you know. And something like this, you know, is happening now. I keep reiterating that we are all beneficiaries of the victories of the Ukrainian army. Because like prior to the Putin's full-scale invasion into Ukraine, I've spent some 10 years, you know, trying to convince at any opportunity, you know, people of theater to do the stage version of Lesia Ukrainka's Cassandra. It's an absolutely great stuff, you know, this publication that Olesia Kromeychuk has announced at the beginning. Well, it's just an excerpt from the 5 acts play. The play written in 1908, and the play without which I think, you know, European literature will never be whole. Because yes, it is the war, it is the Trojan War. The Trojan War portrayed for the first time, you know, in the history of literature, with the woman's eye, with the eyes of Cassandra, and the story of this war is the story of Cassandra, who knows the result, who knows how the things, who sees things, who knows the outcome, but she has a twin brother who is also a prophet, and he is a successful prophet, unlike her. While they are discussing things, it appears that he is a false prophet. But unlike her, he knows how to please the crowd. So it's actually, I would say it is the first play on media populism that I know. 1908, it reads immediately, you know, like this political technology is now used, you know, by power in our contemporary era when politics and show business, you know, have become one. And yes, I mean, this Hellenes who teaches her how to tell things which are useful and which will bring, well, profit. And it is their war, in fact, the war of truth and what is now described as post-truth. In 1908, of course, there was no, you know, such terms, but there was this position, you know, of a woman intellectual, of a European woman intellectual who definitely spent her last years, he died in 1913, in a premonition of the end of her Belle Époque. So she was having, you know, this feeling, and her letters, you know, are the evidence. She was traveling a lot over Europe, you know, she was living abroad for, you know, considerable periods. She was having tuberculosis. It is this, you know, the first decade of the 20th century, this Thomas Mann's Zauberberg, you know, lifestyle. So it was really, you know, her understanding of history and her social diagnosis that, yeah, I mean, something really horrible and momentous, you know, is coming up. The Troy, wake up, Troy. Wake up, Troy, your death is coming. You know, this last scream of her Cassandra.
Which is what you've been saying too, really, isn't it?
Well, you know, it's okay to say something like this when you have, you know, literary mothers or rather grandmothers, you know, behind you. And yes, it is kind of, you know, frustrating when no one knows these literary mothers of you and you know, can't see the contexts, you know, in which you write and talk. So I've been trying, you know, to persuade many theater directors to do Cassandra, trying to convince them that there is nothing more topical nowadays, you know, when we are facing, you know, the same finale of our Belle Epoque approaching. So do Cassandra, okay, now, okay. Now, after Ukrainian army has broken these old stereotypes about Russia, the leading world power, and Ukraine being some small suburbia, some bleak suburbia of Russia or backyard or whatever, and you know, 72 hours, how long they can stay and actually what they are needed for. Okay, the important thing is to pacify Putin, well, and so on and so forth. Well, and then it appears that as some American military expert said that we were thinking that Russia is the second army in the world, and it's just the second army in Ukraine. Yeah. So it proved to be the second army in Ukraine. So after, you know, this after this big lesson from the Ukrainian army, you know, when I received the news that Theatre Omnibus in London is going to do Cassandra in October, that the London premiere of Cassandra, you know, is on its way, well, that was, you know, the moment, yeah, when I realized, yeah, that there was really, you know, a bitter grain of truth about this old saying that the only difference between a language and a dialect is that language is a dialect with an army and a navy. Once you got an army and a navy, okay, then everyone will be interested sooner or later, you know, in your classics, in your literature, in the quality of your literature. And I think, you know, with this regard, Ukrainian literature has a brilliant, you know, future on the world stage, because there are, you know, dozens and dozens of really first-rate authors to be discovered, translated, adapted, appropriated, staged, whatever, you know.
And I'm not going to ask you a question about this, I'm just going to say it because I think that'll be quicker. But this book, Your Ad Could Go Here, is a book of short stories, and there are some wonderful stories in there. One which is set against the background of Maidan, and very much this personal and political, and then one which is set at the invasion of Crimea and Donbass, and it's just, this one is in English, so you can get it here, and that's why I'm telling you about it. Now, Phoebe, do you have a roving mic somewhere? So, would you like to? We have a question here, and anybody else? If we just get a whole load there. So if we're right there. So should we start there with that lady there, and then we'll come to this gentleman here.
Over the last 30 years.
Thank you.
Okay, not 5, maybe 3.
A selection. We'll do a selection.
More, to start.
You mean to be translated?
Yes,
the first on the list to be translated, yeah?
Okay, let's do it like that, because I know that this is probably the biggest problem, that there are not so many books.
Okay, where do we start? 5 5 books. Okay, that sounds like the list of New York Times. You know, no, I remember they were doing this last spring, like top 5 books to understand Ukraine. I remember because your ad could go here was also on the list, and I thought, oh my God, you know, there are no like. You know, works of historians or no, there was Sergei Plokhy's, you know, the Gate of Europe. But to start to do translations, to explain. Okay, I would start with a non-fiction. And I would have done, just theoretically, I don't know who is going to do this kind of work, but this selection of Lesia Ukrainka's letters from the first decade of the 20th century. That's the Ukrainian view, a very Ukrainian insider's view to the landscape of the pre-war Europe. You know, still Belle Epoque and pre-war Europe. It's gorgeous stuff. I mean, they are wonderfully written. I mean, she was a great writer. And yes, it reads, you know, now like some, I would say, a great blog. Because since she was living, you know, spending a lot of time separated with her family, and she was very close, you know, the family were intellectuals and family was also scattered asunder. So she was writing them, you know, all those letters which are mixed of travelogues, you know, diaries, political comments, you know, political essays, pamphlets and everything, philosophical remarks, and it's an absolutely great reading. So, so I would say that would be very, very helpful. Yeah, and.
I'm just going to have to flash the clock at you because.
Oh my goodness! I've just done one position and there are still 4. Oh my goodness! Okay, Хвильовий, Підмогильний, Домонтович. Okay, I hope you are putting down names. I don't have.
But you know what? There will be an opportunity because you'll be signing books and people can ask you questions then. Is it very, very short?
The question might be short, the answer.
I'll pass the mic, but would you allow me to just make a very brief interruption on what Oksana just mentioned? So the anthology I mentioned earlier, Ukrainian Cassandra, already has some of the letters translated.
Oh,
and
that's a good news.
And the translation is by Daisy Gibbons, who's present here, over there, sitting right in the back.
Wow.
And in fact, there are other wonderful translators of Ukrainian literature into English here. And also, Cassandra is being performed in Cambridge and in Oxford soon at the end of March. So please check our website. There you go.
Excellent. This is our last question. Thank you for being so patient.
Thank you. I was rather shocked to discover, I think this is the case, the London Library doesn't have any of your major works that you've been talking about, at least not in English. But I'm sure that will now be corrected. However, I'm very grateful to Lesia Ukrainka, but I wonder if you could mention just 2 other authors, preferably fairly modern, that you think we should read.
In English, that's already translated.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about what we normally call literature, belles lettres.
Well, I think Sergei Zhadan is translated into English. Zhadan. Sergei Zhadan is translated into English. That's definitely. I would strongly recommend, I mean, once we started with the war, I think it exists in English. I know it exists in English, but I don't remember the publisher. Daughter by Tamara Duda. It's the novel. Oh, I see there are Ukrainians. Yeah, yes. Now I can hear you guys. Yeah, Dotya. Yeah, it's a novel. It's a bestseller. it's a best-selling but well-written a novel about Donetsk 2014. The novel from which I finally learned for the first time, you know, how it was developing, you know, how it is possible, you know, to launch the war in the, you know, in a big city, nearly 2 million inhabitants, city out of nothing. Just out of nothing, how it appears, how it proceeds, and again, you know, it is a woman's story, and it is a real story. So it is a kind of affection, I would say. You know, it used the character has a real protagonist, a woman who was living in Donetsk and was volunteering, and it is really, you know, a very interesting prospect, you know, how you can understand how this is happening and how this can happen any day, everywhere. That's it.
Just before we go, because I know that you're all gagging for a drink, you've been doing just incredible work. You've been going everywhere. You've been talking about this. It's been taking you away from your writing. It's taken you away from your family. I just wonder, Oksana, how you are.
I'm making it. I'm making it. You know what helps? What helps very much? I mean, I'm serious. It is only half joke. On some especially, you know, impossible days, when in the end of the day, somehow you've accomplished that all, and you go to bed, and you are saying to yourself, wow, looks like I am making it. And it really gives you some, you know, strength to move further. Because you never know, it has something to do with creative writing. You know, I admire this saying by Robert Frost, who once said, for me, writing starts when I discover that I know something I did not know I knew. And it is like this discovery of your inner strengths, of those potentials that you were not aware of, that, wow, well, I'm making it. And I think, you know, it is this kind of feeling that probably the whole Ukraine shares during this past year, because we made a lot of discoveries. Like, we were not particularly proud of the state that we have built in these 30 years, and then we discovered that it appeared to be quite efficient. Hey, and yes, and it works. And look, it works somehow miraculously under bombs, you know, and under missiles and under bomb shelling. It works, and yes, we've survived the blackouts, we've survived the attacks on our infrastructure, and somehow, somehow it's very livable. It appeared to be a very livable country. And it is like, wow, we are making it. We are making it.
Well, thank you for making it. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.